Welcome to the Explainer. So, today we're going to talk about something pretty wild. For centuries, the ultimate blueprint for architecture, well, it wasn't a set of drawings. It was us, the human body. All right, so let's jump right in with a question. What does a classical column actually have in common with a human head? Now, I know, it sounds like a weird riddle, right? But the answer? Well, it unlocks this entire worldview where people literally built themselves into their surroundings.
And believe it or not, the clue is hiding in plain sight, right there in the language. That word capital, the fancy top part of a column, it comes straight from the Latin word for head, caput. So the top of a column is literally its little head. And this wasn't just some poetic metaphor for them. Nope. For these architects, it was a totally literal connection.
Okay, so this whole head and capital thing, that was just the tip of the iceberg. It was the start of this incredibly deep philosophy that saw the human body, well, pretty much everywhere in a building.
The thinking behind it was actually pretty simple, but really powerful. It went something like this. If the human body was created in God's image, that means it's this perfect, divinely made thing, right? So if you want to make a perfect, harmonious building, well, you just have to copy those proportions. Architecture became this way of taking that divine order and literally carving it into stone.
And look, this wasn't some vague, artsy idea. You had giants like Bernini arguing that the different styles of classical columns, the Doric, the Ionic, the whole gang, they weren't just random designs. He said they were based directly on the different proportions of male and female bodies, everything from the strong, masculine ones to the more slender, feminine ones.
And they took this analogy to some pretty wild extremes. I mean, get this. The architect Jacques-François Blondel would literally judge the top molding of a building, a cornice, by comparing it to a human face. He'd look at one design, like Vignola's, and say, ah, yes, harmonious, a perfect profile. But then he'd look at another, like Palladio's, and basically say it looked like a jumbled mess of features from totally different people. Can you imagine?
So, we've gone from the head to the face. And now the idea expands to the entire body. And this is where it gets really interesting. Because buildings start to get more than just a shape. They get a character, a personality, even a life story.
So how can a building have a personality? Well, to get that, we need to talk about this old idea called physiognomy. It's basically the belief that you could judge a person's entire character, even their soul, just by looking at their face and their features.
You had artists like Charles Le Brun who actually tried to turn this into a science, mapping out exactly which facial expressions went with which emotions. And architects? They totally ran with this. They took that idea and applied it straight to buildings. They believed each architectural style had its own character, so you had to pick the right one for the job. You'd want a strong, serious Doric column for, say, a courthouse, but maybe a more graceful Ionic one for a library.
And then an English architect named John Shute takes it a step further. He doesn't just give them personalities. He maps the entire human life cycle onto the 5 classical orders. So the simple, sturdy Tuscan, that's old age. The strong Doric is a mature man. You go down the line until you get to the most ornate one, the Corinthian, and that represents a young maiden. It's the whole family tree in columns.
And again, this wasn't just some abstract idea in a book. You can actually go and see it carved in stone. If you ever go to Bath in England, look at the buildings by John Wood the Elder. He would stack the different orders on his buildings, starting with the strong Doric at the bottom and rising up to the elegant Corinthian at the top. He was trying to mirror the body's own internal organization, right there on the face of the building.
Okay, so we've covered a single building, but this way of thinking didn't stop there. Oh no, they scaled the whole metaphor up to the entire city, which they started to see as one gigantic, living organism.
And this idea goes way back. I'm talking all the way back to the 12th century. You had thinkers like John of Salisbury, who were already talking about the body politic. For him, the prince was the head, the senate was the heart, the judges were the sides, and the farmers, they were the feet, holding the whole thing up. Every single part of society had a role, just like a part of the body. Fast forward to the Renaissance, and planners like Francesco di Giorgio are taking this idea and applying it literally to how they design cities. They lay out a city map like it was a human body. The fortress became the head and brain, protecting everything. The church, that's the heart. And the main city square, that was the umbilicus, the very center of life. This metaphor got so deep into the culture that even the layout of a church was designed to look like a person. Specifically, the body of Christ on the cross. The chancel is the head, the transepts are the outstretched arms, and the long nave is the torso. It's all right there, a sacred space, literally built in our own image.
And this all gets wrapped up perfectly in this famous quote from Leon Battista Alberti. He said, "The city is a big house, and the house is a small city." And that's really the key. It connects everything from the smallest home to the biggest city in this one unified vision that has humanity right at the very center of it all.
All right, let's pull all this together. So what? What does this all mean? What was the point of seeing buildings and whole cities this way?
Here's the big takeaway. This was never just about a cool design choice. It was a complete philosophical system. It connected humanity, architecture, and the entire cosmos into a single, divine order. When architects built in our image, they weren't just being clever. They were trying to create a little piece of heaven, a slice of that perfect cosmic order, right here on Earth.
And that leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. If all those classical buildings tell a story about a harmonious, divine, human-centered universe, what story do our modern skylines tell about us? What do our glass and steel skyscrapers say about what we value today? What are we building into our world?